This is D.T. Grant and the Practice Podcast, the place where we dive deep into the hidden world of healers. Today, I'll be interviewing an osteopath like myself. His name is Donald Hankinson, and he was the first person to introduce me to osteopathy back in 2000. He is incredibly knowledgeable and has had some of the best teachers of our times in osteopathy.
Please take me to that other place. You make me feel in another way. I've tried to find
And now, welcome Donald Hankinson. How are you?
I'm good. So how long have you been doing this?
Since August?
I've been interviewed a few times, but I was most recently in Italy. I tend to speak quickly, so he asked me to go through it for him and to fill in some of the blanks for him. And it was so embarrassing to listen to myself. It's like when people take my lectures, and they want to share them with me. It's like, no, I never want to hear myself speaking.
Well,
Thank you very
you did
much.
so many lectures, I think you would have to listen.
Yeah, no, I'd rather not. But anyway, so I will be on my best behavior tonight.
So I was thinking about how I first met you, and you were actually probably the first person to introduce me to osteopathy. And I shadowed you when you were about to close your family practice clinic, and you were
Oh.
going to start your osteopathic practice because it was like August of 2000.
Yes.
I was moving to New York, and you said, contact Zena Pelkey. So Zena brought me to St. Barnabas, and I decided only to apply to osteopathic schools. But then I became a translator at St. Barnabas, and I knew Spanish. So I started going every week and translating.
Oh my gosh.
But you were the
Thank you
first
goodness.
person.
Oh, thank you for sharing that memory with me.
Yeah. And then I think I was your assistant for your first phase. The phase courses were started by Jim Jellis, who was an osteopath. These courses focus on a cranial approach to osteopathy using a technique that Jim called biodynamics. I stayed an extra year in medical school as an osteopathic and anatomy teaching fellow, and during this time, I was Donald's assistant for teaching his first phase course.
You were. That I remember distinctly. You were an angel for me because it was really very stressful to be taking on that commitment and to be doing it away from home and in my own OCD style. When I teach, I get intensely engaged and involved with my material, and you were just this calm, patient, and steady presence. You have coupons from that for the rest of my life. Anything you want, anything I can do for you, you could never fully exhaust or even begin to exhaust the gratitude I have for that.
Oh, it was a
So
great
just so you know.
experience. I remember coming to get you in the morning and you playing your guitar. And you had a
Yes.
song I really liked. It was something about when you're lost and can't find your way, just remember there's a road. Was that the song? Yeah.
Oh,
that was
yes,
it.
I had just written that song.
Yeah.
That's right. It's nice to have somebody reflecting back that what you've produced is of some value to them. So I really appreciated you were very supportive of that as well. I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. So
Anyway.
now, how would you describe osteopathy in your own words? In a way for people who know nothing about it, how would you describe it?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people who will listen will not know
Yeah.
anything about it.
Yep. The first thing to acknowledge is that as an osteopath, I am not a healer. The osteopathic acknowledges the fact that there is a healing force. Osteopathy is a science of healing that recognizes that this unity of mind, body, and spirit is an essential part of growth and development and healing. So the osteopath learns how, through the use of our palpatory touch, to read what the system is doing, to perceive what the healing force's intention and plan is, and to cooperate with that to the benefit of the patient so they can realize their potential for healing at any moment. And what's unique is that we use our hands. It's amazing to me how anyone can do family practice or any sort of therapeutic relationship without putting their hands on. We know what questions to ask when people come in. So I'm asking them about trauma they've had, physical, emotional, spiritual, mental trauma. I'm asking them about changes and things that have happened in their lives. I'm asking them all these questions when they come in with simple back pain or a cold or asthma or headaches or depression, whatever it is. And when I get a stream, I follow it, and yet I still don't get the history because they either have forgotten it, didn't know it was important, or think, well, that happened when I was a teenager and I'm now 50. He doesn't want to know about that. And then I put my hands on them, and I have this little girl, so, she's probably only 10 years old, but she came in with some breathing issues. And so I started to ask about shocks, thinking diaphragm and all this, what could be? No. And I put my hands on her, and I could feel that her sacrum felt like it had been pushed up like just below her clavicles. I started asking more specific questions, It feels like did you fall on the ice? Were you kicked something? And yes, she fell off a horse, but wind knocked out of her. But of course, she got better right away. There's so many times where the only way I get the information that I need, or I get some of the information, but I still don't know the significance of it until I put my hands on, and I feel what's actually happening in the body.
I have my own way of describing the story of where osteopathy came from. So I was just kind of curious what your story is of Andrew Taylor Still. You want my story?
Yeah, tell me.
Well, Andrew Taylor Still was a surgeon. He worked during the Civil War. His father was a minister, a reverend, and all of his family members died. And he was frustrated that medicine couldn't help his family. And he sort of locked himself away and started dissecting cadavers and found imbalance in the structure and felt that was what led to disease. And he started coming up with techniques to treat people. He would ride out to their homes on horseback like a woman with pneumonia and sit and treat her ribs all night long, and her pneumonia would be gone and she might have died otherwise. So that's the story I know.
Yeah. Have you read the book From the Dry Bone to the Living Man?
No, I haven't, but I've not yet read it.
Oh, that is such a gift of the profession, because I've struggled to put this history together myself, and he did such an incredible job.
Didn't he take 15 years to write this book?
Phenomenal. Really incredible. Yeah, so Still was a physician by mentoring. So there were physicians and then there were MDs. You could be an apprentice physician, and that's what he was with his father. Because he went to his father's medical school for a year and just didn't like what he saw there. His father was a Methodist minister as well as a physician, and Still, although a spiritual person, had a lot of problem with the dogma that he saw in religion and the hypocrisy that he saw in it. And when he was probably like late teens or so, they moved to this Shawnee reservation where his father worked with them. And he found there a spiritual perspective, a vision of the Creator and our roles that fit very well with what he saw, which was that there was this direct connection between this loving, intelligent Creator, and that all of nature was a unified expression of this one idea of wholeness. He was working in this way and seeing the shortcomings of the medical model, because the medical model, they called it heroic medicine. And heroic medicine, the heroes were the patients, because they were giving them calomel and lead and all this horrible stuff. And he had an experience when he was younger where he had a headache, and he put his head on a rope swing, and he fell asleep, and he woke up and his headache was gone. And then, it was spinal meningitis. And three of his own children all died of spinal meningitis. The doctors all came and said, well, God took them back. And he said, I just don't believe that this was God's plan for them. That was the thing that really set him off on his journey. And then at 10 a.m. on June 22nd in 1874, the whole thing came to him. June 22nd at 10 a.m., 1874, he had this awakening.
And that was when osteopathy came out. That was when he came up with the idea.
The whole thing came to him. Now, he also said at his 70th birthday, he said that the foundation of his profession came from seeing his father's devotion, that love one another was the foundation of osteopathy and the guiding principle of it all throughout. So that it is based on love, that love of humanity and of the Creator and of human nature and of service to people was the foundation he was building, and he got a broader context for that from the Shawnees spiritual philosophy and foundation. But it was at this one moment that this whole thing happened to him. Someone asked Einstein how he developed the theory of relativity. They said, so Dr. Einstein, did this come to you all at once, or did you like kind of work it out like painstakingly over years? He said, well, after spending 10 years, spending every moment of my life working on it, it came to me all at once. And so that's kind of what it was like for Still. All of these things built up to this moment.
Interesting.
And then he had this epiphany. He said he saw the whole thing before him. The book is From the Dry Bone to the Living Man.
Okay. So Sutherland he was a student of Still. And what
Correct.
I know of William Garner Sutherland is who founded cranial osteopathy. He was in med school, Andrew Taylor Still's med school in Kirksville,
Yep.
and he was looking
Yep.
at a case, and in the case was a disarticulated skull, and he noticed that the sutures were like gills of a fish, and that gills of a
Yes.
fish allow breathing, and that there had to be
Yes.
some element of motion. Then he started to come up with the idea
Right.
of cranial
Right.
osteopathy, which
Right.
is the idea of movement along the suture
Yep.
lines of the skull.
So the great thing is that Still claimed no authorship of osteopathy. He said, no human hand has framed its laws. I ask no greater honor than having discovered it. And Sutherland said that he was given a thought. He took no responsibility either. He said, I had a guiding thought that looking at this, beveled like the gills of a fish, indicating a mechanism for respiratory motion. It was something that Dr. Still had. It was part of his science of osteopathy. He just hadn't had the time to develop all of his thoughts on it, and Still did talk about the cranium and the CNS and the cerebral spinal fluid and all those things and their importance, but he hadn't fleshed out that part of it. But up to that point in the scientific world, it was the bones of the head fused, and you just had this locked box. And here he's looking at this thing which has bevels, which developed because of motion between the bones. And so, yes, he spent 40 years before
Sutherland?
he began to teach it. Yeah.
40 years before he began to teach cranial
Yes.
osteopathy?
Yeah, so I think it was like 1898 when he was at the school. It was like just before the turn of the century when he had this epiphany. And he didn't start teaching until the 1930s.
Wow. I know that Sutherland used his body as an experiment to study even further, and he would put his head in like baseball mitts with vice grips and things to squeeze different parts, like maybe the temporal bones together, and did all kinds of crazy stuff and would develop psychosis and other things, and his wife had to pull him out of these contraptions, but he tested himself to understand what was happening.
Exactly. When people would question him and say, well, that's crazy. You're talking about the temporal bone and what it can do. I mean, that's crazy talk. And he would write back to them and say, well, here's what you do. Okay, take a catcher's mitt, and put it aside your head and get a belt and hold it tight and restrict it, and then just like lie there for 45 minutes or an hour or two and see what you feel, and then write me back and let me know.
Did anyone do it?
Not that I'm aware of, but because he said you really do need to feel these things in your own body to know them. Still talk very much about how demonstration, how we really have to study and know these things. But Sutherland took it a step further in saying, we really need to feel these things within our own bodies. Sutherland did those things, and so he waited all those years.
Sutherland came up with the idea of cranial osteopathy. Many of you have probably heard of cranial sacral therapy. And that is a technique that was started by Sutherland, and an osteopath went outside of the osteopathic community to teach non-osteopaths his version of cranial osteopathy. So that is what is called cranial sacral therapy. Many people have used cranial in various ways, and some approaches are a little less mechanical and more subtle. And now back to the interview with Donald. How did you get into the path of osteopathy, or onto the path?
So I had no idea that I was interested in healthcare. When I graduated from college, I hated sciences in high school, so I somehow got through college without taking any science. And I think if you had asked me when I graduated, what the top 10, 15, or maybe even 20 professions might consider, I don't think anything in healthcare would have been on there. It wasn't on my radar. But my girlfriend wanted to go to California, so we went. And I ended up working at this residential treatment center for schizophrenic teenagers, and it was spiritually based. And so I really very soon realized how much I enjoyed the service in healthcare. But I was gravitating towards the body-related programs, and someone suggested I go to this Reichian therapist, and maybe that's what I would like. And so I met him, and he said, no, I think you might like osteopathy. I had no idea what it was. And he said, well, go see Muriel Chapman. I went to see her, and I had a kind of a sprain in my leg, but not that I was seeking treatment, but I just went there for that. She had been a student of Sutherland's. She just kind of gently touching, starting at my feet, and she traced the sprain right up my leg, right where it had been black and blue, and I was kind of amazed, and then I fell asleep, and I woke up, and when I stood up, I felt so incredible. The feeling was like nothing I'd had before, and I just knew it, that was it. You know, whatever it was that she had done, whatever her training was, whatever an osteopath was, is what I wanted to be. I had had no clarity up to that point, but at that point I knew that was it. So then I went back and had to do my sciences and applied to schools.
For those of you who don't know, in osteopathy we become a DO rather than an MD. And the training process is similar to allopathic medicine. We have to take the MCATs and do all the prerequisites to get into medical school. And then we take all of the same classes, but there is one additional class that we take, which is the practices and principles of osteopathy. And we also have a lab where we practice the various techniques that there are in osteopathy. After medical school, we attend a residency, which may be primary care family medicine, internal medicine, cardiology, surgery, all of the same things that MDs do. And there's one other option where we can just do a practice of only the manipulation or bring manipulation into those other practices. Now back to Donald and his discussion of Muriel Chapman, an osteopath who was in California.
She was very sweet. I would call her after that when I was thinking about what I was going to do. You know, that's how I discovered osteopathy. I mean, basically, I think my responsibility in this whole process has been to say yes. You know, people open doors. I went to California because of my girlfriend. She's the one who found the treatment center. And it was just like one doorway after another where people said, you know, you should consider walking through this doorway. And I ended up osteopathy. It's my complete skill set. If I wasn't doing this, I have no idea what I would be equipped or qualified to do in life. But this is just perfect for me. So I feel so blessed that it found me.
It sounds like the road was laid out for you.
Right. And then I went back to school and started studying the sciences. I couldn't get enough of it then. Yeah, I just dove right into it. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. And it's an opportunity for kind of developing yourself intellectually. But, you know, this whole spiritual aspect of it for me was so important to have an opportunity for service, for meaningful service. There is this very wonderful mentor-mentee relationship. This generosity of the elders towards the new people coming in, and now I'm in a position where I can give it back as well. I just think that that's also such a very special blessing in osteopathy.
It's kind of like the oral traditions that get passed on from one generation to the next, like shamanism or whatever. But
yes, exactly. Right. To be in a profession that has its foundation and principle is also a central part of my love of osteopathy. Dr. Still said, you know, you have to obey those natural laws or fail to cure your patients. It's not an enforced or an encumbering of responsibility. It's a devotion. Yeah.
So where did you go to medical school?
So I went to New York.
You went to NICOM.
Yeah. And that's where I met Stanley Shiowitz. And he was kind of my first mentor. And what a wonderful man. He was high velocity muscle energy.
Some of the techniques we learn in osteopathy include high velocity, low amplitude, or HVLA, which is a quick thrust that sometimes makes a popping or cracking sound, and you're sort of directly pushing things back to where you want them to be. Another technique just mentioned is muscle energy, which I equate like stretching. There are other techniques not mentioned, such as counter strain, where you basically wrap around a tender point. There are trigger points, which we often stretch. There are myofascial techniques where we work on muscles and fascia, cranial techniques, which I already talked about. And there are many other techniques that have accumulated over the decades since osteopathy was created. Let's return to Donald's discussion around his education.
They started a fellowship my third year. I wasn't going to apply because my wife had supported me through school and she was ready to get on with our lives. And so when I heard there was going to be a fellowship, I didn't apply for it. And then I got a phone call asking me whether I wanted it because they wanted to know before they offered it to somebody else. I realized then that that was probably something I should do. And I'm so glad I did. So
Again, you're saying yes.
yeah, again, right. Somebody opening a door again.
So were you initially more mechanical because of NICOMs, the people who trained you?
Yeah, my training was, but my orientation was still from the way I had been treated. And it wasn't only being treated by Muriel, but as I said, when I worked at this treatment center, we had a Sonoy dream session every morning where we would tell our dreams and we would have dream tasks. And it was a Jungian-based treatment center.
Jungian Sonoy dream work looks at dreams as a source of wisdom and personal growth. This dream theory suggests that people can decrease their fears and increase pleasure through dream work.
I just fit right into that so easily. It just was a path with which I had great resonance. That was my orientation, before osteopathy. I learned the principles, but as I said before, something that's more structurally based and something that is more functionally based. We have to remember that it's all one thing. I felt like Stan, as much as he was a muscle energy, high velocity guy, he very much was aware of and had fidelity to those principles of unity and structure and function, and the fact that the source of the healing was coming from something greater than himself. So as Dr. Becker said, you're applying principles, not techniques. I think that Stan was applying principles. I brought him up years later in his 80s to Maine to teach. One of the people watching asked him what he was doing, and he said, "I'm following my fingers." And I could tell that they were very dissatisfied with that answer. And I just loved it. He had this incredible sensitivity to read the body. I'm going to spend the whole year studying Dr. Still, and it's very much in his tradition of studying what was going on in the moment and then finding the direction and then following it. Stanley absolutely did that as well. So it was a more mechanical-based approach, but it still was based on principle.
Yeah. I have a lot of patients who ask me what I'm doing, and I kind of panic inside. So I like that answer.
Yes.
And I think, why do I have to try to explain what I'm doing?
Well, I always start with patients and let them know that, after we've done their history and all of that, I tell them that my core responsibility as an osteopath is to find their health. That's what Dr. Still told me, that the object of the physician was to find health, that anybody could find disease. No matter what they're struggling with or suffering from, there is a pure, pristine health inside of them that is not damaged. Even if its expression has been restricted, it is still perfectly and pristinely there to take care of them. And my job is to find that and to help it meet its potential, which neither I nor they nor all the great minds of history and computers in the world can predict. People like to hear that, partly I think because it's true, and partly because so much of what happens is when things aren't getting better to the extent that we need to seek help, it shakes our faith in our capacity to heal.
So what sort of patients do you see? What people tend to respond to what you do as an osteopath? Do you know, does everyone respond? I mean, from my experience, I don't find that absolutely everyone does.
So as I said, I treat anybody who isn't getting better. But I've seen people for the whole spectrum of things. And it's part of, I think, our responsibility to let people know that the healing comes from within them. I have not provided the healing. Just as when they've cut their fingers and it disappears, it's the same exact process that's going on. And to realize that if things aren't improving with whatever they're doing, then often looking at it from an osteopathic perspective can be helpful. We don't limit patients by our own expectations. I'm sure you've had the experience. People come in with something, and you just think, oh my God, what could I possibly do? Or conversely,
yes,
tension headaches. Yeah, I
so
treated tension
easy.
headaches when I was a second-year student. No big deal. And person isn't getting better. And what do I do then? So then my job is to say, well, is it something I'm doing, something they're doing, or am I not the right person, or is there something else? So that's always a hard thing when people aren't getting better. I have to be as compassionate and as honest as I can, as supportive of them as I can, and not get too attached to that, but to stay and help them as much as I can in that process. Yeah, no, I've had the experience where what I've done has not been helpful, and it's always very hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a patient who came in for a workman's comp injury, her shoulder, and got better, probably about 4 months or so. And she said, could I keep coming? And I said, sure, people do that. It'd probably be good to see you once in a while. And she said, I've had this lifelong depression that has been debilitating for me. And the psychiatrists have all fired me because I can't take any of the medications. And over these 4 months, she said, my depression has been the best it's ever been in my life. I wasn't treating her depression. And in some ways, I hope I wasn't treating her shoulder. I was treating her. 98% of the time, our bodies heal themselves of all kinds of things. We learn to do that. There are times when we don't, times when we can't, times when there's either not enough vitality in the system, too much resistance in the restriction. Maybe people are depleted and don't have the power.
So when it won't work on its own, what is it about what osteopaths do, what you do or I do, that helps build the vitality or whatever they need that they can't do on their own? What do you say is happening?
Okay, so this is kind of an interesting answer, but that's love. So we open our hearts and we surrender ourselves. This is something that we need to develop the skill in doing this. It takes some training to do this well. We make ourselves available to be of service to that patient. We can help the patient to meet their potential for health. And sometimes that involves doing things. I mean, I do high velocity. I do muscle energy. All these techniques can be used in a way that is in service of these principles.
You also, I remember, because my son was breech, and I came to a phase course you were teaching, and I had a version done, and you said to me, that's strange. Were you getting treated during your pregnancy? And I was not. And I hadn't been introduced to treatment until then of breech pregnancies.
Yeah.
And you said, you kind of showed me how you do it, and you explained stories of people who were the babies or twins flipped or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I have my own personal experience with a breech pregnancy, and I had not been getting treated by an osteopath at the time, nor did I know that there was this possibility of turning the baby with osteopathic treatment. But aversion is when around 37 weeks you go into the hospital and your doctor can manually turn the baby using maneuvers on your belly, but they have you connected to a monitor, and if anything happens, you can go in for an emergency C-section if needed. There are other techniques like acupuncture where they burn moxa on a certain digit of the toe and do other things to loosen the walls of the uterus and make it easier to turn the baby. You can also sit with your legs up against the wall in sort of inversion poses, and that is supposed to help the baby flip. Some say you can spread your legs and shine a flashlight up through your vagina, and that light can guide the baby to turn their head downward. So I was successful with aversion medically in the hospital. But after my son was born, I went to a course with Donald where he informed me of the treatment techniques used to help turn a baby.
That's one of the things that in Jim's teaching that has been not so much the thing that I've used the most, but it's just such an important thing if you can help. There aren't really good alternatives. The external version is painful. It's successful maybe, about 50% of the time. And it has the risks associated with it, and you can't do it with twins. And we have something that's safe, simple, and the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work, but you can help people have a normal vaginal delivery of their babies.
Now I'd like to switch topics and ask Donald about an osteopathic legend he worked with. How did you find Ann Wales and end up in that study group?
The same way everything else has happened.
You just said yes.
That's right. So I went to an SCTF course in Texas, and I met Jane Alexander, and we just kind of hit it off, and we worked together. We just stayed in touch, and she was part of the original group with Jim Jealous that discovered Ann and began, the study group with her. Though when I was finished with my time in Nevada, I owed the public health service a couple of years. I was finishing up. She arranged for me to come and sit in on a meeting. I met Ann.
Just to note, Anne Wales was one of William Garner Sutherland's students. Anne Wales lived to about 106, and she didn't have children, but all of her students were like her children. And from what I've heard, she was incredibly precise and a brilliant osteopath who had a study group of many students, many of who were my mentors and are my mentors. And that was located in Rhode Island.
She was so amazing. So she began to tell me the history of the osteopathic profession in New England. She was the most remarkable osteopath, but she was the most remarkable human being I have ever met. Really? She was about as close to being perfect as is possible, I think. So bright, so loving, so committed to what she did. She wasn't self-effacing either. She knew what she knew, but there was no hubris in it. She would say, I'm always surprised that people who admit to having no idea what I do feel perfectly comfortable telling me what I am and am not capable of accomplishing. Every word, like right in place. She was just amazing. One of the great blessings of my life is to have known her and to learn from her. And yeah, she's still in my heart. And, you know, when I taught early on when she was alive, I never gave a lecture without calling Anne first. The very first meeting I went to, she would walk in, beam, and look around at every single person and say, well, everybody's here. You know, and I thought, oh my God, I'm part of everybody. Anne's happy that I'm here. I'm important to her.
That's cool.
I'm making her happy. You know,
everybody's
here.
You were all her children.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Stanley Shywitz was my osteopathic dad, and she was my osteopathic mom. Mm. We were her children. We all just loved her unconditionally, as she loved us. She was remarkable.
Yeah, you've had a lot of amazing mentors.
I have.
Family.
Thank God. I needed every one of them.
Is there anything I'm missing?
I'm hoping that the changes that are coming in our medical system and in the profession, that the principles of osteopathy as a guiding light will continue, because I see that students are less inclined now since the pandemic to come to courses that are designed for them, that are inexpensive and in their backyards. As much as I feel a responsibility to my patients, I feel it also to the profession, and I'm doing everything I can to find where the sparks are, who has a little spark in their heart, and to give it a little bit of energy and a little bit of support to kind of help it to come to its natural crescendo. That's my concern at this point. Other than that, I just feel so blessed. I can't believe the life I've led. When my aunt died, they said something about her being an ordinary person living an extraordinary life, and I thought, that's me. I'm a person of average skills, but I've had great teachers and I have a great method, and I've been able to be of service to a lot of people, and I just have such gratitude for that.
Well, you also, I think your graciousness and your lovingness, that brings you what you give back to you.
Mm. Oh, thank you.
You deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, my mother used to always say that to me. You know, she said, well, you deserve it, honey. And I said, you know, Mom, everybody deserves it.
Yeah.
But I'm getting it.
Yeah.
So there's no denying it's grace. I've been graced. There's just no question. My teachers, my friends, you in my life. I mean, so many people who I just treasure, and I feel so grateful to have these opportunities.
Well,
for joy.
Anyone who interacts with you is blessed to have that experience.
Oh, it's very nice of you to say.
And I have one other question. I did mention this, but I call this the Practice Podcast. And if you have a practice, whether it's spiritual, self-healing, anything, what is that for you?
The principles of osteopathy are principles of not just osteopathic practice, but they are the principles of living a meaningful and purposeful life. I meditate. I try to cultivate the capacity to be receptive to a loving, creative presence in my life. And I try to find opportunities for love and joy wherever I can. And they're everywhere. It doesn't have to be anything big and complicated. It's a question of having openness and love and gratitude. And I think that'll lead you on the right path.
I was just going to say, something I see from knowing you is that you just have a positivity and a gratitude that comes out in your being all the time. And whether you see it as part of your practice, it's part of who you are, and it helps.
Yeah, but I also cultivate it. I consciously work to support that because I think it gives me joy.
My memory is you played guitar a lot of times when I see you.
Music and dance are an essential part of that for me. That is where really mind, body, and spirit come together most easily, and I share that with people as often as I can. Osteopathy was an aggressive campaign for love, truth, and humanity. And I think that it really is that when you find these truths, you find these fundamental principles, it doesn't matter whether you're talking in a religious or spiritual context or in music, great artists and dancers in so many disciplines, you end up with the same principles. You always come to those same principles because they're the fundamental principles upon which the universe is founded and through which it emerges in continuing cycles of death and rebirth.
I know you taught this. Jackson Pollock's art's full of fractals, and it's mass chaos, and it's full of fractals, which are perfect symmetry in nature.
It's nice to just have other things that kind of reflect back to you. Because, saying all of this and sounding pretty confident about it, because I've experienced it, there still is always that voice in your mind saying, well, yeah. And so, are you sure? And I'm not sure. So whenever I hear these things, it's just like a little bit more, yes, oh, good. See? I told you. It is true.
I get it. Thanks, Donald.
Oh, thank you.
So good to see you.
Great. So good to see you and talk with you. And I hope that we can find some other way to cross paths again.
I know.
Before more years go by, because I just so enjoy being in your presence. You have a golden ticket anytime you want to come. Come to the office, come to a course I'm doing, arrange to take a walk, whatever it is. I'm also teaching in Italy.
Actually, that's a great idea.
This fills my soul. It's manna.
Yeah, I know. It's really nice to see you. Thank you. Yeah.
Bless you.
Good to see you.
Right. Okay, good to see you too. Take care.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Bye. This concludes the 7th interview of the Practice Podcast. I'd love to thank Donald Hankinson for doing this interview with me, for reconnecting and giving us his perspective on osteopathy and giving us a little bit of a background and clarity. It's always so good to talk to him. And I'd also love to thank the band Modera Cayenne for letting me use their amazing song, To Find You. If you'd like to learn more about Donald Hankinson, please go to www.thepractice-podcast.com and follow me on the Practice Podcast. This is D.T. Grant, wishing you a magical and inspiring journey towards health. Thanks for listening.